آزادی بیان
言论自由
free speech.
Thank you, Peter Pomerantsev, for agreeing to speak with us today here at the free speech debate. I was wondering if we could begin by asking about the concept of free speech in Russia, and what does it mean in Russia, and does that differ from what perhaps it means anywhere else in the world?
Well, there's been a shift since Soviet times when there was sort of a single truth that the Soviet media and political apparatus would insist on, and everything that disagreed with that was sort of pushed into dissent. It was quite easy to see who were the people battling for free speech because they weren't allowed any kind of official media role. So Putin's system is far more sophisticated. It does actually allow for little pockets of free and sometimes much freer than in the West speech in terms of, there are certain media which are allowed to rant at people in power and slander them far more than they could here. They get in trouble, they get sued because they're allowed that little bit of free speech. But it's framed in a certain way that means it's very, very contained, and it's kept off the main sort of sources of media. So the idea is they don't want to form another dissident class. They want to make sure that the opposition has its tiny little corner and is never let out of that corner, but has somewhere to let off steam.
And if I could ask you perhaps about what role television specifically plays within Russia, it seems that it is perhaps a more important form of media there than anywhere else. If you could perhaps talk a little bit about the role of television.
Well, it's the key one. So the first thing that sort of Putin does after he comes to power in 2000 is grab hold of TV. So before he takes control of energy or the secret services or the bureaucracy or anything, the first thing he does is take control of TV, get rid of the oligarchs who could play kingmaker and take control of TV. I think he'd learned personally how powerful TV was. I mean, when he was appointed prime minister in 1999, he was a non-entity, and he was really created as a political being via TV and a made-for-TV war and a little bit of terror, But he realized that he was a creature of TV, and so he took it over. And so it's absolutely key. It's sort of Stalin was sort of 80% terror and 20% propaganda. Putin is sort of 90% propaganda and 10% terror. TV is what they see as the central sort of political mechanism in the country. So it's absolutely key.
And what role specifically does Russia Today play within the Russian media landscape? And in what way does it differ from other similar media organizations like Al Jazeera, say?
Well, Russia Today, as we know it now, has been through quite a few iterations since it was born, and we could see it's been looking for a role just as Russia has been looking for a role. But now it's informed very much by contemporary Russian military information war theory, which is something that's been building since 2004, but really since 2008, it's much stronger, which is when RT really in its present sort of rabid form really gets going after the war of Georgia. So Russian information war theory looks at media not as a propaganda as we know it, not as a form of persuasion or public diplomacy or communication or giving the Russian point of view or any of this rubbish. It is a weapon with which to demoralize, divide and conquer, so conspiracies, and so on and so forth. So it's the weaponized information. It has nothing to do with the sort of role of Voice of America or even Al Jazeera, which tries to reframe the debate about the Middle East plays.
And how do you perceive that the Russian media landscape has changed since the conflict began in Ukraine?
It's the other way around. It's created the conflict. It's not that it changed. This is a war that has been one of the few good phrases The Economist has come up with recently. Hallucinated into reality. I thought that was very well put. No. This is a war made through propaganda, made through TV. It's absolutely amazing. There was 20 years of Ukraine's existence. There's been all these sort of political games and political technologies and maybe narrative tensions between Donbass and Kiev and Lviv, but there hasn't even been a hint of violence. So the idea that these two bits of Ukraine could be fighting with each other, even a year ago, was absurd. I laughed at it, and this has been created via media. This has nothing to do with journalism. What they do, it's military. I mean, the Russian information war theory. The whole idea is that you can destroy another country just through the power of media, economic warfare, secret services, a little bit of covert conflict. But this is a war machine. It has nothing to do with media.
Has the recent murder of Boris Nemtsov also had an effect on the Russian media landscape?
In the philosophy of Putinism, and certainly in the philosophy of the people who run the media, it's not the event happens and that creates the narrative. It is we create the narrative which redefines the reality. They're utter post-structuralists in that sense. I mean, it's the most postmodern country out there. Some of this has its roots in the Soviet approach to propaganda, where this very Leninist idea that you could create a new man, a new society by propaganda. It's a very old idea which is embedded in the system. But what matters now, the Nemtsov thing, is which narrative they choose. I mean, almost the event doesn't matter. As it doesn't really matter for Russian TV what happens in Donbass. All that matters is the narrative they need that week. So it'll be very interesting to see which narrative they choose, and they might still be searching for which narrative they want. Do they want to slap Kadyrov? Maybe. Will they use it to give a slap to DNR and LNR, the Donbass people? There's a lot of stories that they want to cut them off now, so they need an excuse to cut them off. Or will they try to, which is one of the fears, that they had people, they will try to pin it on the Ukrainian secret services. They had enough people inside the Ukrainian secret services in order to engineer something like that. So we'll see. Really, actually, in a way, the event doesn't matter. All that matters is what they now do with it.
And could you perhaps tell us an incident from your own personal experience about how narrative is formed within the Russian media and how news is created?
Well, I'll give you a silly example. When I went to work in Russian TV, I worked for a channel that makes reality shows in Western formats. And at one point, one of the Western producers found out that the people that were in the Fact 10 program were actually actors, and the production company was just scripting everything. And he went to complain to the channel boss, saying, "This is a disgrace. This is documentary." And the channel boss was like, "What are you talking about? What the hell do we care? We don't care if they're actors." And so, I mean, that was just a tiny reflection of what happens on the news. So when Deputy Minister Alexei Volin, the Deputy Minister for Communications, so the Minister for Press, was asked recently whether he had a problem with all these sort of invented stories on Russian TV. So there's been stories about crucified sort of Ukrainian nationalists crucifying babies, Ukrainian nationalists giving drugs to 8-year-olds so they become rabid killers. All this sort of like absolute and utter fantasy. And he was asked, "Do you have a problem?" He's got, "No, all I care about is ratings." And this idea that there is no difference between drama and fiction is something that we sort of like, we like to talk about, but they actually do it. They've sort of made that political reality rather than academic theory. News is just another species of entertainment, and not just entertainment. I mean, it has a sort of a military function. I think everyone living in Russia kind of understands that and accepts it. And it's actually a very complex game with society. People know. Okay, let's take an example. When the Bush administration was trying to convince everyone that there was WMD in Iraq, they were really trying to convince people. They were like, Colin Powell, sat there with this ridiculous little bag of whatever, heroin or crack or whatever that he had. I tried to convince everyone. Whether they convinced themselves or they were faking it, I don't know. But the whole idea was to convince the world. Russian propaganda doesn't even try to pretend that it's faking it. It's sending a very, very different message to people. It's sending a message like, this is the reality, don't mess with us. It's the same during communist times. Everyone knew that communism was fake as well. But it's sort of a covert message to people, like, this is the reality, do not mess with us or we will, destroy your business, put you in prison, whatever. So it's almost, I don't know if you've ever looked at Peirce's ideas of how language works. So it's not language itself, but language is always a sort of communication is always a three-way structure between the said, that which is being talked about, and the person receiving the message. So that's how communication works there. It's not like this is the truth. It's like, see this is the way we're talking about it. Therefore, the message is don't, follow this and do this. Do not, it's a contract. Everyone always knew in Russia the elections were faked. Nobody cared about the elections. The Kremlin's problem was getting people to go and vote because everyone knew they were a bloody joke. But the message was, we are so in charge. We are telling you Putin has 80%. So Putin has 80%. That's what it is. And you can sort of be corrupt, all the things you want, as long as you pay fealty to this kind of truth that we're saying is the truth. That takes a long time for a Westerner to get his head around. But that's the kind of odd relationship the Russians have had with truth in Soviet times. It's nothing new. I was just in Moscow, and this guy, this very, very rich guy, who owns one of the founders of the Russian internet, he was giving me the new Kremlin line on the internet. He's like, obviously the CIA invented the internet, and we all know that WikiLeaks was a CIA project. And he gave me this smile at the end. He didn't need to say anything. He was like, so this is the new joke reality we have to imitate. And we will kill for it. It's very serious. But this Leonidova has a whole sort of chapter in her books. I think it's her last one, Sistema, about the smile that people in Russia and other post-Soviet countries give you. So there's the truth, and then there's a kind of the very ironic attitude towards it. It's a startling chapter. So once you understand that smile, you kind of everything starts to fit.
And has this idea of news as entertainment, has the ultimate goal been to create a viewer who is apathetic?
The whole propaganda is so confusing and the messages are so mixed, it can't help but leave people sort of plastered to their couch. So the Kremlin's ideal viewer is sitting on his couch, drinking beer, definitely not getting off his couch, going, oh my God, the Americans are to blame for everything. That's the ideal viewer. So listen, for example, if they were doing classical agitational propaganda, they'd sort of get people very emotional by showing dead children in Donbass, and then push towards a charge, and then get out there, with your flames at night and the whole Nazi thing, which is all about creating a push towards violence. So Russian propaganda is something utterly different. Non-stop kids dying in the Donbass, which if you watch Russian TV all day, you are furious at the West by the end of it. But then just at the moment that they would push a militaristic kind of propaganda, there'll be an advert going, all these people are saying we should invade the Donbass. You have to understand, these people are all working for the CIA. The Americans want to drag us into a war in Ukraine. So you're just sitting there going, okay, give me another beer. So their ideal viewer is apathetic, sitting on the couch, and not doing too much, which means they have huge problems when they do need them to go out on the street. So when there were protests against Putin, and they try to get the pro-Putin camp out on the street, nobody would go because they are, it's propaganda designed to keep people passive and cynical and paranoid, sort of passive-aggressive, but definitely not marching. So they have a real problem getting people out on the street. So when the Russian opposition movement got going in 2012, the story that they put was, obviously they work for the CIA, but the main story they did was actually these guys are working for us. The thing about Navalny they keep on spreading is actually he's a Kremlin puppet. So it's just to undermine the faith in the opposition, like everyone's a puppet, everyone's for sale, everything's show, everything's theatre. It's cynicism as ideology and as political pressure. There's a very simple way of checking it. When they want people to come out on the streets and support the republics or do the anti-Maidan, they have to pay them. They can't actually get people on the streets because everyone's attitude towards it is both, sure, the West is out to get us. That paranoia is deeply implanted in Russians' brains. You don't need propaganda, they believe that anyway. But the world is out to get us, all that stuff. But actually going and supporting, do we really want to be fighting in Ukraine? Not really. So they're not very good at getting people out on the streets, which is always a sure sign that people actually have a strange distance to the propaganda. I think we misread that sometimes. People here keep on saying that it's fascist propaganda. It's not classic fascist propaganda. It's very different. What would be very interesting to look at would be, are the younger generation inside Russia especially, are they actually more gullible than the older ones? And do they look at things differently? My sense, having lived there, is that they're still pretty cynical, and cynicism is default.
آزادی بیان.
言论自由
free speech